Hello, this is Galaxy Burn, the first and only Warhammer 40,000 podcast, the only one on the internet. I'm here with a guest I've really wanted to get on for pretty much since we started. This is coming all the way from Toronto. Did I get that right? Toronto?
It's Toronto-ish, yeah.
Toronto-ish, Canada. This is Meritt K.
Hey, thanks for
Hello.
having me. And can you imagine, there was a time when there was only one Warhammer 40,000 podcast? Someone must have been the first. It was this
Yeah,
one, right?
it was, yes.
Yeah.
The first one happened like 2 months ago. And there's definitely not been this colossal influx of Warhammer 40,000 podcasts in the last month. It's gone completely
Yeah.
insane. Everyone seems to be starting one.
Right.
And apparently to be in the cool kids club, I need to be a VTuber. I think that's the key. Is I've got to be a little anime person. Possibly,
Yeah, that
possibly
helps.
cat girls seem to be doing just great. They're killing it out there.
I think we are
There's
going to hit peak soon, though. I think there's only so much room in the market.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a cat girl who does reads entire Black Library novels, like 8 hours. It's just this little bobbing cat girl head in the corner while she reads an entire
Okay.
novel. And,
I
you
mean,
know,
cat
different
people are
strokes.
canon. They're canon. Cat people are
They
canon.
are. They are. Yeah,
They're real.
tell
They're real. No models yet, but one day maybe.
So, yeah, thanks again for this. And one of the uh, kind of key reasons you're here is that you on the podcast Guys, which is I'm going to check my notes. It's a podcast about guys. Am I
I
right?
think that is correct. Yes.
Okay, yeah, all right, okay, good. I had my team of researchers running around the clock for that one.
Uh-huh.
Brilliant podcast. I love it. I love everything Brian does. And hearing about the ins and outs of his life. Very brilliant guy. But you were on a episode about Warhammer 40,000 guys because it's a type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's very
Yes.
much a type of guy, and the the moral of the podcast, guys, if a podcast can have morals, is don't be a kind of guy because you're just going to
Mm.
get so weird so fast.
You'll start a hotel.
Oh yeah,
You'll open up a hotel in Ontario.
yeah.
Uh,
So that Merritt is referencing mini wargamer Dave, who has started a hotel, like Warhammer themed hotel, like the Star Wars hotel,
right.
but for Warhammers, for
Yes.
being somewhere you absolutely don't want to be. I never actually looked up his hotel. I'm
Okay.
gonna.
So thing about the hotel is, I mean, it's a cute idea. And obviously a lot of work has gone into it. The one disappointing thing for me is that the the actual hotel rooms are themed, but then if you go into the bathrooms, they're just normal. They're just completely normal white bathrooms, and it's like, you know, stick really go the 100%. I want rusty metal and a shower that spews irradiated water.
Yeah,
Just continue the theming throughout, I think.
yeah. It's kind of lazy. Just you want to have just like the worst toilet experience of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure they talk about this. I'm sure there is a term, there is a Black Library approved term that they probably call them refreshers or something like that,
Yeah,
like
it's
in
another
Star
instance.
Trek. Yeah.
It's another instance where they invent words for things that you don't really need to invent words for,
Yeah,
like
but you need a
loom
sort of
instead of light.
futuristic, vaguely Latin sounding term to make it sound more interesting, I guess.
Yeah, I'm one of the people that doesn't work for. I'm just like, call a
Mm.
lumen a light. It's a light.
It's a lumen. But yeah,
It's
there are
like
some, it's funny,
it's not going to change.
funny the nouns that are allowed to continue and the ones that have to be changed. And I kind of do wonder if there is like a Bible somewhere, like a black
Yeah, there
library
must be.
lore Bible that is like, here are the terms that we use. Like, did they send that out to
Yeah,
new writers, or like how does that work?
yeah. There must be like someone has that on their computer, like some big spreadsheet,
Right.
and
Like
they just
find
like
and
control F
replace.
every.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that must be so annoying for people. Like, like uh, we've both done journalism to some extent, and getting edits is soul destroying. It's horrible,
Mm,
especially when they make things objectively worse and you can't retell them because they've got the money.
right.
And yeah, getting someone to say it's not a cat actually, it's a felid. That would just be yeah. I'd hate myself for that. But yeah, we're here to talk about we're here to talk about guys.
Mm,
It's a guys' day today
mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm.
I one of the things you brought up on guys, a podcast about guys, is that when 40k started out, kind of like the rogue trader kind of era, there what like sex existed.
Mm-hmm.
People, sex and desire and relationships were a thing, and that's slowly been turned down over the years. Like I did a review of Inquisitor, the first ever
Mm.
40k book. I don't know if you read it. Probably if you haven't, don't
I
bother.
haven't, but I'm vaguely aware of it.
Yeah, you may have seen like discussion in the community about it
Mm-hmm.
because it's I mean it's like most like 80s 90s sci-fi novels. There's a lot of like pointless gratuitous sex and sexual violence, of course.
Mm.
Um, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or we should bring that back because honestly, it's a lot of it was kind of cringy. But you know, it's also a part of human life. And even if you are writing about like 9 foot tall dudes in the future, you're still writing about human life, kind of sometimes. And yeah, it's just kind of gone away really significantly over the years. And yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about that. And then also this concept that I keep seeing applied to Space Marine 2, specifically Space Marine 2, but also Warhammer in general,
Mm-hmm.
calling it a male fantasy.
Mm.
And how something so like asexual can also be a male fantasy.
Mm.
Like male fantasy is supposed to be like Playboy, you know? You're supposed to be like, you know, in a hot tub with 10 bikini girls. That's a male fantasy. But being like a neutered giant soldier from the future, is that a male apparently it is. Like I've completely missed the meeting on male fantasies. Because apparently we're not supposed to be horny anymore. We're supposed to be violent.
Yeah. I mean, wow, it's such a broad topic, right? There's
I'm sorry.
so many. So, yeah, no, there's so much to talk about. But I mean, before we get into all of that, like, yeah, so the only Black Library book that I have read is Eye of Terror, which is really hard to find now. But it's really weird and gets into, as the title implies, like a lot of chaos stuff in the Eye of Terror. And I think it was one of the first books that really described like some of the weird phenomena that are happening in that realm. And there's a lot of like weird, like kind of sexual stuff happening too. I think like there's a lot of Slanesh stuff in that
Mm.
book. And not so much like noise marines, but like demonettes and then like weird worshippers and stuff like that. And yeah, it left a weird impact on me as a kid because it felt kind of like Hellraiser ish, which is obviously what a lot of that stuff is riffing on.
Mm. Yeah,
But
I've never heard of this novel
yeah,
before.
no one talks about
What
it.
makes that?
I don't think it was like a good book probably if I read it today, but I read it when I was like 12 years old and was like,
Mm.
this is really, I think I read it because like I was just like, oh, I need to like read a book for school or something. I'm gonna just read a Warhammer book.
Yeah, it's
Um,
a good book report.
yeah, classic move. But obviously a lot of that stuff has changed because GW or which like I feel like that's changing too. Like we don't even talk about GW anymore. It's just Warhammer now.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
is has become like a multinational corporation and like the Warhammer brand is more important than ever. And it's much less about what they're doing with the property than with the ways they can license it out. And that means that some of the weird edges that they have created over the years sort of have to be sanded down, in the same way that like Star Wars does, or
Mm.
Lord of the Rings, or anything like that, which, yeah, is kind of a bummer. Um, but I think that's part of the dynamic. But Space Marine 2, you were talking about as being
Mhm.
like part of this, or like maybe like one of the biggest parts of this in like the last year anyway, because it is this huge AAA game that
Mm.
is about Space Marines. And
Yeah, I think it's sold like what 4 million copies as of recording, something completely insane like that, like a
right,
very high
right.
number for
Yeah,
what is essentially like a almost like a B tier game. It's not one of those it's not Call of Duty. It's not
mm,
yeah, it is like a B tier game, just like the original was. I
hmm,
think yeah, the original kind of came out when like the concept of a AAA game started to be a thing, and it was kind of buried because at the same time you got like Gears of War came out the same year, Dark Souls
right,
came out the same year.
right. Mass
Yeah,
Effect 3 was around the same time, I think, too.
it was, yeah, and yeah, that just buried the original. And now that triple, it's either the world is either AAA games or it's like Vampire Survivors.
Right. Yeah.
There is no middle ground.
Yeah.
And yet this game came into the middle ground and is done like AAA numbers. And a lot of conservative, kind of like the anti woke guys, your Asmongold's, people like that, um, have attributed that to the fact that it allows you to play out a male fantasy, and that's just the most bizarre thing in the world to like most people who have read 40k stuff or know anything about it, because there's nothing fantastic, there's nothing good about any of it. Like you don't want to be these guys, and it's so bizarre to me. But I think it's just where men have gotten to this point where they're so weird and alienated, and if the internet's driven them so insane that the idea of like being a neutered 9 foot tall guy who lives in a tiny little box room and that gets sent to maybe die to giant bugs is more appealing than being a guy who does an internet job and comes home to his girlfriend and has to compromise sometimes.
Yeah. It is strange because the way you're describing it, like, oh, wait, being a Space Marine is living in a pod and eating bugs. And that's
Mm.
the thing that these guys hate, and talk
Yeah.
famously about not wanting to do. Yeah, I will live in the drop pod. I will eat the bugs, the nutrient paste, or whatever.
Mm.
And yeah, it is strange. I think like the part of the fantasy aspect of it is like just sort of the absence of women, which is kind of odd
Mm.
to think about, but that is where we've gotten with a lot of this stuff. I did see when the game first came out. It's funny because like on the one hand, you have people who are like, "Oh, this is like the apotheosis of this fantasy. I want to be a space marine, hanging out with my friend, my bros, my
Mm.
brothers, and doing battle and achieving glorious combat." But then there were also people saying like this game is woke bullshit
Mm.
because you have a black ultramarine and like an Asian ultramarine, and then so it's like forced diversity, and also you have a female Cadian commander. And when that came up, I was like, well, hold on, like the first game had that too,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah.
and no one cared at the time. Uh, And then I dug it a little deeper, and it's like, oh, people are pissed off that she's not as attractive as the one in the first game.
Mm.
But also that you have to like take sort of, you have to hear her sort of give you orders at all. Like people are very upset about that. And like oh, I can't believe there's non-white ultramarines because there is like a weird thing in Warhammer has, I mean, the same kind of thing as like every mainstream sci-fi thing does, where it's like every world or faction is like one type of guy, And they've sort of tried to move away from that, but like it is an easy way of distinguishing things, right? So it's like ultramarines are like the space Roman guys, space wolves are like the space Vikings, salamanders are, well, we can't quite decide if they're space black guys or if they're just kind of like space like granite skin guys.
Yeah.
Like I feel like they've kind of gone back and forth on that. But now they're like, oh no, there's like no reason why you couldn't have like a black ultramarine. And almost certainly it's because they've realized like, oh, like we're alienating a ton of our potential audience by not doing this. So like we could make more money by doing it, because I don't have any illusions about any corporation making like doing things like this to be like righteous or whatever. Like they've done analyses and decided like, oh yeah, if we have, you know, if we make a little note that there's female custodes, then that might get more women into 40K or like if whatever. But it's funny that these guys don't even seem to be able to make up their minds. And also that just like everything is a part of this culture war of like, and to some extent it's just because there are a lot of people on YouTube who their entire model of getting clicks relies on making people mad, making their followers mad, right? Like there are still people on YouTube to this day who are making videos about how the Star Wars movies, the Disney sequels, were abominations, and like still getting clicks and like still getting traffic based on that. Maybe not as much as they were 5 or 10 years ago, but like it's still happening. Not 10, 5, you know, whatever. So like there's an ecosystem that rewards this stuff, right? That rewards whipping people up into a frenzy about it. And at the same time, it also rewards like kind of this gloating of like, that's right, like we beat the woke agenda. Space Marine is like a male fantasy. And I don't know. I mean, I think for like a certain type of guy, it probably is like this thing of like, there's no like feminine bullshit around you. There's no like, like all of these influences that like guys like Jordan Peterson talk about of like, that are like constraining men from like acting in this certain way. There was a tweet the other day that was like, oh, like women like dream of dying like peacefully in their sleep with their families or whatever. Like men dream of dying in like glorious combat. And it's like, I don't think most do.
No.
I really don't think that most do. Also, like, I'm sure the idea, like anyone who's like read fiction or like watched a movie, the idea of dying in a blaze of glory has some attraction to it, right? Of like, you know, but you don't necessarily want to in reality.
Yeah.
Like it would be frightening and painful and horrible.
Like just think about how many like veterans come back with PTSD. That's like
right.
I don't know a whole lot of like US veterans, but the ones I know, all of them have some sort of disability. Like either their body or their mind is broken. It's usually the mind. And that's from like relatively low intensity wars compared to like, you know, World War II or something. Like
right.
Iraq and Afghanistan are not Stalingrad. But and the people who experience this, they hate it and they want it to not happen. A lot of like kids on the internet think if they could like just be in the Punic Wars, then they would
if I could only die of like an infected
like the whole
wound,
Bronze Age
you know?
thing.
The
Roman Empire would. God, here. Oh no, let's come back. And this fascination with the Roman Empire and all this talk about like that was when men could be men. We'll be Spartans, the most manly men to have ever been men. Which, you know, not what a historian would say about the Spartans. It is pretty bizarre. And yeah, Space Marine 2 arrived at the exact right time when men had gone completely insane and then threw up a bunch of Roman imagery on the screen plus guns. It was kind of like, it couldn't help being interpreted as a male fantasy. They had no chance. It was, and I think going back to something you said about like the world that these guys live in, that the Space Marines live in, like when you're on board the ship between missions and just walking around, and you're seeing all those like servitors and the tech adepts just like hunched over, and their like boss is chewing them out because they didn't say the right hymns to a screwdriver, and it's very like hierarchical. There's like the space marines at the top, then there's the tech guys, then there's the servitors, and you always know where you are. And do you remember that bit where there's like a guy who's gone blind, and he's one of the tech guys on the ship, and he's being forced to like clean out the sewers of the ship, and he's like he's like complaining about it, and he's got this like very hunched posture. It's very obvious he's meant to be like a beta in the ship's hierarchy, and yeah, that kind of speaks to the kind of viewpoint, the way these like conservative men see how the world should function. Of like, yeah, if you're a beta, you should be, you should go and clean the sewers because manly men should get everything, and you should feel bad about everything, and you're probably going to whine about it, but there's no use in whining because that's just how the world is. It's Space Marines on top of everyone else on the bottom, and
right.
yeah, it seems horrible.
Yeah, it's funny because I think the assumption is usually, well, of course I would be on the top of the hierarchy. Of course, in this world, I would be a Space Marine. And there was a tweet going around, I forget who it was, but someone had posted like a screenshot of like a Space Marine standing next to like a, like a servitor or like a chapter serf or whatever, and was like, oh, it's so cool being a Space Marine. And like someone retweeted it and said like, all of the guys who who think they would be Space Marines in this world would be the serfs. Like even just by raw numbers, most people would be that. And and then some
Space Marines and
and then
humans.
Some masculinity guy was like, well, there's dignity in this kind of work, and like you wouldn't understand. And it's like, that's not the message at all that you guys are like coming across with. Like that, the message is like it's not. There certainly is Warhammer fiction that is about that. That is about like, oh, to keep this system as cruel and unjust as it is running, like, or to keep even like a Space Marine in battle requires the work of all of these people behind the scenes who are like unsung and working in munitions factories and whatever. And there is, that's kind of interesting to think about, like the supply chains and all the quiet work that has to happen for the glory stuff to go on. But these guys like aren't like, they would not be happy with that, right? Like they're not like, oh, well, at least I could be like a serf helping like polish the bolter rounds before they are fired into like Tyranids. Like, no, that's not. You want to be a Space Marine, and that in itself is kind of a strange fantasy because like to me, Space Marines are not like they're kind of tragic figures, right? Like for the most part, there are exceptions, but and maybe these guys see that as part of the fantasy, but you're not really a human being anymore, and you're kind of set apart from this connection with humanity in order to protect it. Like that is the interesting part of Space Marines to me, is like we've created these superhuman warriors, and basically taken them from a very young age and raised them to be basically just weapons. Like there are some chapters who do like artistic pursuits or religious stuff or whatever, but for the most part, like their whole deal is they fight, and like that isn't a good life, but not everyone agrees with me on that, I guess.
Apparently not. Yeah. No, Space Marines are. I think that there's a lot of like male fantasy, like movies and games and stuff, where to kind of try and compensate for it, they make the guy like kind of tragic in a way, like John Wick, or even like real life people like American Sniper. Like the movie made this guy look like he was like regretting everything, but in real life he was actually completely insane and utter psychopath. He loved killing people more than anything in the world, and then ended up getting killed because of it. There's like it's almost this instinct of saying, we're self-aware. We know we're tragic. We know we're doing these terrible things, but it's still what we have to do. It's what we must do. And and that's this kind of like function of stopping people thinking from like, is this actually good?
Right.
Like, is the idea of, we'll make superhuman warriors and send them out into space to kill everything in sight. Like, is that the best we could be doing? Can we maybe do a little better? And it's the same with military stuff, like even like Band of Brothers or that kind of like military. We're all in this together. A load of us are getting machine gun every day, but we're still got to get through this together. And that's the kind of that's the male fantasy that people want. It's a really bizarre thing considering like how comfortable everyone is nowadays.
Yeah, I mean,
People who want this are like eating chicken nuggets on the couch.
I think a generous interpretation of this would be that what people want when they see something like this is not necessarily the like bloodshed and like violence and like atrocities, but a feeling of actual connection with other people. Because that is, I think, what a lot of these, not just like Warhammer, but even stuff like, I don't know, like shonen anime or like like war stuff too. It is like, what if you had such a strong connection with like a group of your friends to the point where like you were like battle brothers? Like that is a really potent thing, I think, in a time when people feel very isolated and materially comfortable in a lot of cases, sure, but cut off from other people because of a variety of factors, including like the way that social media kind of atomizes people, the way that people are like encouraged to feel like they have to perform constantly online, like the instability of employment, all of these things, like I think make it harder for people to feel connected to one another. And that kind of makes sense to me of like, oh yeah, that is pretty cool. This idea of like, what if like you just had like the tightest like group of friends, and the way that bond is forged in a lot of fiction is through life and death situations, right? Because that's like a really quick, easy way to do that. Otherwise, those connections usually take like years or decades to form.
And then fall apart because someone moves to another town or
Right.
something.
Right. So
Like,
that is my like very like generous, like this is the best case scenario, I think. And I can sort of see that. I don't see the sort of like wanting to live in 40K. Like if I had to live in 40K, like I feel like the only good option, like if you have to say like, okay, pick a faction, is like, I guess I'm going to go tech priests, because that seems like the least bad. Just worship a toaster and turn half your body into 6 robots, and like it's like the least awful. In many ways not great, but you just get to read a lot and just fuck around, I guess.
it probably wouldn't be my choice. I'd probably just go for the Tau. Have a very simple life, like on some world, like farming all day.
Right.
That's probably like the least bad choice.
See, it's funny though with the Tau how like, because I remember when they first brought the Tau out, and it was clear that they were trying to capitalize on the popularity of Gundam and other anime, and people were so mad that there was a faction that was like quote unquote good. And then they had to do that retcon of like, actually, the ethereals are mind controlling everyone, so it's still dystopian and awful.
Yeah, and in doing so, kind of just like turn them into like another imperium.
Yeah, kind of not as interesting.
Yeah, I think like they would be more interesting if they were good, but had to live in this awful universe.
Right.
Like idealist like Starfleet kind of organization, finding out that it actually lives in this monstrous universe full of like literal demons.
Hmm.
Hell is literally real. There are like gross S&M elves can kidnap you and torture you for all eternity.
Right.
Like that's what more interested in. Oh, everyone's just evil.
Right. Right.
Be more interested in that they have to like deal with living in a completely different universe from what they thought they lived in.
Yeah.
It'd be like, I don't know, like if communism won and everyone was living on a commune and everything was good, and then we found out like hell existed. That's it.
Hmm.
That's a good story. I might write that.
Hell,
Um,
hell is real, by the way. Oh, geez. Marx failed to consider that the warp,
exactly.
actually.
You did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And it's funny, like, even thinking about the Tau to connect this back to games, like, Fire Warrior was one of the first big 40K games. Like, obviously, there
Mm,
had been turn based stuff before that, but Fire Warrior predates, I think, even Dawn of War.
mm.
And
Oh yeah. It was, came out like a couple of years after Halo, and it was
right.
touted as like, oh, this is the next Halo.
And it
Like,
clearly
good for
wasn't.
that, guys.
And it was
Yeah.
terrible in a lot of ways.
Mm,
But it's interesting that that's what they tried to do, that they didn't really try a Space Marine focused thing until
mm,
a while later. It felt like a little more experimental at the time. And then it was, years later that the first Space Marine came out. And yeah, I just don't even remember the first Space Marine being nearly as much of an event, and I think that's just due to
it wasn't.
Warhammer becoming much, much more popular over the past decade.
Mm,
Because I think it was sort of like mostly talked about as like, oh, this is like sort of an okay brawler character action game. If you like Warhammer, you'll probably like it, but it's fine, and I enjoyed it. Like I played it at the
yeah,
time, and I liked
yeah,
it,
but yeah.
but it wasn't nearly as big a deal as this one is, and it's really strange to see, as someone who like has dipped in and out of the franchise for like 20 years, how big it's gotten since the first
Mm,
Space Marine came out, and how much it's been tied into
mm,
like the weird culture war stuff.
yeah, yeah. It'd be so great if we could just like enjoy this thing getting really big and without like the culture war stuff. That's like put like a pall over everything that's happened in this last like maybe like, basically since COVID. I think it was COVID that did it really. You know, people started like painting up their armies. They started like spending more money. Like if you
Right.
look at like um, Games Workshop stock, it's just like da da da
Hmm.
da COVID.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, but also it like they have been trying to get more commercial. They've been pumping out all these games. Like there's a new Warhammer game every other day. Most are pretty terrible. There's like lane pushers and movement
Hmm.
shooters that aren't particularly good. There's been like what three like good Warhammer games, like Space Marine 2, Dark
Space Marine
Tide,
2.
and what's it called? Total War.
Well, I would also put Rogue Trader and Bolt Gun on that
Oh
list.
yeah, I haven't actually played Rogue Trader, so probably yeah.
Yeah.
Boltgun was good. I like that. That
Yeah,
was
I like those sort of like simple shooters sometimes.
mm,
And I thought Balkan was just really well done, and also it was like the first game where I was like, oh wow, this bolter actually works. Because the
mm,
first Space Marine, even it was like, oh, this is just kind of like a machine gun, and then Bolt Gun is like, oh no, it just turns people in a mist. This is
mm.
basically what it. Even Space Marine 2, it feels a little weak
It
to
does,
me.
yes, but there are like some bolters that feel like just like regular machine guns in like Call of Duty or something.
Right. And
You,
maybe
you
they're
do
trying to
sometimes.
sell like maybe they're trying to sell Tyranids being tough, but I'm like, it's a
Mm,
Hormagant. Like it should
yeah,
explode when I hit it with a single round.
yeah, and humans do the
Humans
cult
too, yeah. So
will
I guess
turn
maybe they're
into
trying to say like, look, even a basic Gaunt is tougher than a human.
mm,
Maybe they are. I don't know, but But Rogue Trader was also really good. I
Yeah, I haven't
enjoyed
played
it a
that.
lot.
Does it take a long time? I don't know
It
if I've got enough
kind of
time.
does, because it
'Cause-
is a CRPG, so it does take a while.
yeah,
But
it's the same
it
reason I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3 like
it
everyone on the
is,
planet has. I
yeah.
can't have a conversation with
I
anyone.
left I left that game for a while, and then I finally got into it, and it ate several months of my life. So I
Yeah.
don't blame you. Rogue Trader is a little shorter. The production values aren't quite as high because it's Owlcat, and it was probably not made over like 5 to 6 years. But it it gets into like a lot of like weird 40K
Yeah,
stuff, and there are Space Marines in it, but they aren't really the focus.
hmm. Yeah, I've heard it like goes places that like most stuff wouldn't and investigates stuff. And it has romance in it.
It does, which I was very surprised that it did. It has really strange romance too. Like you can, one of the options is like a navigator.
Oh yeah, I've seen her, and she's like a red puffy eyes. She looks like she has myxomatosis.
She has a third eye too.
Oh, cute.
And
Oh,
there is both an Eldar, regular like Craft World Eldar who basically hates you and sees you as just like a horrible lesser life form, and you can
right.
sort of like win her
Like,
over.
like most girls did. Okay.
And then there is
That'll be
also a
very
Dark
easy for me to
Eldar.
adapt to. Yeah.
There's a Dark Eldar who is immediately just down to clown, and if you get involved with him, it causes like a lot of problems on your ship, which
Okay,
is very
I
funny.
could also relate to that. Wow, this is just my life. But yeah, you know what we should. Speaking of video games, I heard through the grapevine, i.e., like Steam and your Twitter, that you've made a video game.
Yeah,
That-
well, I've been involved in this. It's me and two of my friends. We formed a little tiny studio called In Secret Places, and we are just putting the finishing touches on a game called Fledgling Manor right now.
But yeah, so yeah, tell me. Okay, tell me. I know a fair bit about that. I haven't played a demo just yet, but I will probably maybe even tonight. But okay, so give me the kind of elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Sound like the CEO of Activision or something. Who wants to be my
So
studio now.
it's basically Big Brother meets What We Do in the Shadows. Uh,
Yes.
you play as a guy who uh, wakes up and learns that he has been transformed into a vampire with no memory of how that happened, and is also now on a reality show where the cast is entirely composed of vampires. And it's a lot like Big Brother, except that when someone is evicted from the house, they are executed. And the sort of premise is that this is a reality show that is watched by vampires, and because they are so old and kind of decadent and weary, they really need something just completely deranged to break through their shell of detachment. So they need to see actual murder and death to enjoy themselves. So
Cool. So is it set in a world where like regular people know that they're vampires?
no,
Or,
so
or
this
like,
is sort
okay,
of
vampires
it's a
like
parallel society, and
okay. And
there's
like
a secret vampire streaming service that only they have access to, and we don't get into a ton of the details because we try to leave a lot of it, mysterious. But it's sort of a What We Do in the Shadows, where there is like this
okay.
underground society that's trying to keep itself secret and kind of benefits a lot from the you'd think like, oh well, everyone has smartphones and like the internet exists, but like yes, but on the other hand, would you believe someone if they claim to show you proof of the supernatural? Like probably not. So so yeah, and that's part of it too, is like the reason they have this show is it's part of their method for keeping the population down. They
Okay.
so historically they've done things like just had purges because the older vampires are terrified that younger ones are going to rise up and like plot against them, or that they're going to expose their society. So they kind of round up newly turned vampires and stick them on the show, so that way they both get to cull the population and entertain themselves at the same time.
Okay, that's really cool. I like that like take on it. I was thinking it would be like, kind of like True Blood or something, where like it's known that vampires exist or something. But
Right.
no, I like that take. It's kind of like what's it called, Vampire the Masquerade, and
There is a lot of influence drawn from that, although for legal reasons it is not associated with Vampire the Masquerade. But certainly, I was a fan of that growing up, and I think that series also draws from things like Anne Rice, which we are influenced a lot by, like Interview with the Vampire, and her other works. Not so much Queen of the Damned, probably, but
have you seen the new
I haven't. I've been meaning to watch it, but I'm not letting myself watch
really
it
good?
until we're done the game because I don't want to
Oh yeah.
unintentionally incorporate anything from that into it.
Yeah, spoilers, it's so good.
I've
It's
heard very good
yeah,
things.
it's really good.
Yeah.
Um, Everyone is now gay for Lestat. I'm like so gay for Lestat right now. He's yeah, very charming. Like they really like let you know why people would like to be his slave for about 100 years.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and they don't do the silly Atlantis stuff from later Anne Rice books. So there's also yeah, you don't want to have Lestat like going off to Atlantis. That's
Yeah, she
not,
got a
not
little loopy there.
yeah, don't know
And
what
then
happened.
the Jesus books. There was a lot going
Oh
on.
yeah, I forgot she did those.
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy stuff going on in New Orleans. You got something in the water down there. Um, so, so who's like the main dude in Fledgling Manor? Who are
Yeah,
you playing as?
so you play as a guy named Rocky, who is a gig worker. He delivers groceries and is also just kind of like into heavy metal and into reality shows as well. So he kind of comes in with like it's interesting because he's the perspective character and who you play as, and so you come in sort of like learning about this world of vampires like with him, but he sort of knows things about reality shows. So if you don't really know much about those and you're going into this game, you have a character who is like sort of voicing things about like, oh, like usually on shows like this, you want to like stick with a group early on, or you want to like vote with the pack or do this or this. So it kind of helps, because I'm not someone who watches a ton of those. My
Same.
co-writer LB is, and we wanted to really get that right and not just be like a broad parody of reality shows, because I think they are compelling for certain reasons, and we wanted to try to nail some of that stuff. So Rocky sort of has some of that knowledge, and so the player, if they don't really have that, can get that through the narration, which is nice. But
So which reality shows do you like?
so
Is there any
I
ones that you-
used to, I haven't really watched many in a long time, but I grew up with the first American boom of reality shows. So things like Survivor, American Idol, Big Brother, The Mole. In more recently, I don't know, I never really, I didn't stick with it after that first boom in the 2000s. I know that my co-writer does watch stuff like Love Island, and the
Sorry.
kind of big UK and Australian
Hmm.
ones that have become popular over the last few years. They're really into those. So that was actually nice because this was a premise that I came up with like last year at some point, but I didn't have the background in reality shows or in visual novels to do it by myself. So having a co-writer on this has like been a huge help with like the genre stuff that I wanted to make sure we got right.
And it is a visual novel. So what? How does that work? Because I don't think I've ever played a visual novel. Like
Yeah,
I know of them. I know like
right.
the names. I know like the pigeon one.
The right Hatterful boyfriend. Yeah.
The boyfriend. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever played a visual novel, even though like TikTok really wants me to play something called Class of '09. Um,
Right. Someone told me to play that the other day too, actually,
hmm,
and I have not yet. But
it doesn't look good. I don't want to play it, but TikTok is insisting.
Well, TikTok will do that. Yeah, I don't listen to TikTok. I think generally is a good rule. Um, but I'm not sure. I haven't played that game. But visual novels, they have been associated historically with the dating sim genre. So a visual novel is basically, for people who don't know, is uh, kind of a genre of game or like interactive fiction where characters are interacting on screen and there's like images of the characters and there's text. Sometimes they're voiced, and usually the means of interaction is making choices. So it is sort of like a choose your own adventure sort of thing, except instead of usually addressing it as you, it's more like there is a character who you're playing as, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of them are like that dating sim kind of thing of, you're like a kid in a high school and you're like, oh, which do I want to date, Sakura-chan or Kyoko-chan?
Kyoka-chan, obviously.
Right, obviously, they're not all like that, and there have been a lot more Western visual novels in the last 10 years. Some of those are kind of silly and kind of like parodying the genre by being like, "Oh, what if you dated office supplies that came to life and were humans?" or what if you dated like weapons in a fantasy world or something like that? And those can be interesting. Ours isn't really a parody of visual novels. The basic like flow of the game is you're going through about 12 or 13 nights on the show, and you make choices throughout of like who do I want to like spend this evening with, or who do I want to work with in an alliance, or who do I want to uh, work with on this challenge or things like that. And it sort of builds towards like different routes through the narrative that you end up taking. So there's a few different ways that the game can end, right?
Hmm.
Based on the choices that you've made throughout. Um, so yeah, I mean it's a narrative based game. It's not like there's not a lot of action in it. It's a little slower paced, but it it's an interesting format to work in. Like I didn't have a ton of experience with it. My co-writer does, and I don't play a ton of visual novels either. But working on one has been really cool. And in the future we might want to do something a little more complex, something maybe with like a world that you're wandering around and more action elements. But I think this we developed this in about 4 months, and it was a good genre or like format to just like build something out very quickly.
Hmm. No, it looks cool as hell. I mean, it looks great.
And we have a great
I
artist.
hmm.
Shade is the name of the artist, and they're just have a really distinctive style that's
Yeah.
pretty different from a lot of visual novels, which tend to be like anime inspired,
Hmm.
whereas ours has kind of this black and white
Yeah, it looks like
thing
very
going on.
like a like 90s Vertigo comic kind of vibe.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really
kind
like
of,
it.
yeah.
I grew up on 90s Vertigo comics.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, most importantly, the romanceable NPCs. Um,
Right.
you've got like a very like buff-looking dude. That's my male fantasy right there. And so tell me about the romanceable NPCs.
Yeah, so you don't have to do romance, like it's not kind of forced,
I do.
but you do. Okay. But
Yeah,
there
I do.
are three characters. So there are eight total characters in the game, including the main character. And then three of them are romanceable, which is kind of an odd linguistic sort of quirk that we've
Oh yeah.
developed in video game world. But like that's just romance has become a verb, which is very strange. Uh, but so there are three characters. There's Stefan, who is this kind of like psychotic, huge guy who doesn't talk very much, and when he does, he's saying something like fucking crazy, and really frightening.
I
There's
could change him.
that's the dream, right? And then there is Anya, who is kind of just a very sweet, um, friendly, kind of like house mom type character who may have more going on than she seems. And then there is Eight, who is a 7 foot tall, kind of like monstrous character who wears a mask all the time. And they are like the most mysterious of these, and definitely are like the fan favorites so far. Like we've
Thank you,
already gotten like
Trajan.
fan art of this character.
Cool.
People love a mask. People love like a monster character, but they are very mysterious. Like we don't talk a lot about their origins in like the early part of the game, but if you go that route, you can learn a lot more about them. And each of these characters also sort of reflects like a response to the the context of the game, and of like the world, because the game is kind of a metaphor for just being in the meat grinder of needing to work and needing to sustain yourself through competition with your peers, while people who are, more senior and powerful than you sort of watch and look on and profit from your struggling with one another. So I think that's something that probably a lot of people can relate to right now. But
A
each
little
of
bit,
these
yeah.
romanceable characters sort of reflect different responses to that situation of like, do you accept the situation and just like learn to work within it? Do you retreat from it and sort of just like fall back into like a private fantasy world, uh, or like adopt different goals, or do you try to like overthrow the whole situation and change how it works? And so each of their routes sort of follows those kind of different paths.
Cool. No, I like that. It's a shame my own job doesn't have like 7 foot tall romanceable character. I can redo it
Yeah,
sometime.
it certainly would
Yeah,
make work more interesting.
it would. And the constant threat of death would probably motivate me. I'd hit my KPIs a lot better.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I would be a lot better at SEO if someone was going to cut my head off if I wasn't.
So yeah, I mean, it sounds really cool. I'm gonna check out the demo. Um, so it's available on Steam.
Yes. So it is on Steam right now. It's also on itch.io if you prefer that site. But you can wishlist it right now on Steam.
Mhm.
And
I have.
thank you. Yeah, even if you aren't sure if you're going to pick it up, wishlisting really helps indie games that haven't been released yet, because the more people that put it on a wish list, the more likely Steam is to show it to other people. Because the thing about Steam is they're a storefront that takes a cut of sales. So they want people to do well. And if they think a game is going to do well, they will push it in front of more people so that they make more money, basically. So, yeah, you can wishlist it on Steam now. It's called Fledgling Manor, and it will be playable on Mac and PC. I think the demo right now only works on Windows, but if you want to play the demo, you can get the Mac one on itch.io. But the full game will be playable on Windows and Mac, and I believe Steam Deck as well.
Awesome. I will check it out,
Yeah,
and
thank
I'll
you.
put a link in the description to Steam and itch.io as well. So yeah, Merritt, where else can people find you? And what other projects are you working on? What other stuff are you?
Yeah, so I'm still on Twitter at Meritt K. I'm also on Blue Sky, merittk.com on there. And in terms of other things I'm working on, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/merittk, where I do comics and fiction. And we have a fun little Discord community where we do regular movie nights. We just did Little Shop of Horrors
Nice.
last night, which I'd never seen before and is now one of my favorite movies. So yeah, you can go check that out if you want more from me. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Okay, and thanks again for coming. And
Yeah, thanks for
yeah,
having me on.
no problem. I'm looked forward to it for a while. And yeah, folks at home, go check out Fledgling Manor. It's really cool. There's a really big guy, and you can romance him. What else do you need? Um, Other romanceable options are available. Thanks, and yeah, come back next week.